The familiar scent of old motor oil and sawdust hit me as I pushed the side door open, a smell that had always meant peace. It was my sanctuary, my workshop, the one place in the house that was truly and completely mine. But the peace shattered the second the door swung wide. The scene was wrong. The overhead fluorescents, which I usually only turned on one bank at a time, were all blazing, casting a harsh, unnatural light on the chaos. Two figures were moving between the open mouth of my garage and a beat-up white van idling in the driveway, its exhaust puffing little clouds into the cool morning air. One of them was my son, Kevin, his face flushed with effort. The other was a man I'd never seen before, wearing a grimy baseball cap and a sweatshirt with a faded logo. They were carrying boxes, my boxes. For a second my brain just refused to process it. It was like walking into your own bedroom to find strangers rearranging the furniture. I stood frozen in the doorway, my hand still on the knob, watching them heft a cardboard container filled with old radio tubes and carefully bundled wiring looms. That was the box from my Philco project from 2 summers ago. Kevin? The word came out quieter than I intended, almost a croak. He turned, a grin spreading across his face that didn't reach his eyes. It was the same placating smile he'd used since he was a teenager, the one that said, "I know better than you." "Hey, Dad, surprise," he said, his voice booming in the confined space. He dropped his end of the box into the van with a concerning thud. "Just doing a little fall cleaning for you. You've been talking about decluttering for months, so I figured I'd give you a hand." My eyes darted around the garage. Gaps were appearing on the shelves I'd built myself, empty spaces where projects in waiting used to live. A cold knot began to tighten in my stomach. A hand? Kevin, what is all this? Where are you taking it? "Relax, it's just the junk from the back," he said, waving a dismissive hand. He walked over to me, pulling a folded bill from his jeans pocket. He held it out like he was offering a treat to a child. "See? I already handled it. Got $100 for the whole lot from Leo here. Not bad, right? We can go out for a nice lunch. $100. The number hung in the air, absurd and insulting. My gaze swept past him, back into the garage, and that's when I saw it. The sight hit me with the force of a physical punch, driving the air from my lungs. The stranger, Leo, was walking toward the van, and in his arms, cradled carelessly like a sack of potatoes, was the Apple One. It was covered in a fine layer of grey dust, the wooden case a little scuffed, the keyboard yellowed with age. But it was mine. I'd built it with my own hands, soldering each connection under the dim light of a Palo Alto garage, the smell of solder and ambition thick in the air. It wasn't just a collection of circuits and wires. It was a time capsule, a testament to a moment in history I had helped to build. It was my youth, my proof that I had once done something that mattered. "No," I said, my voice stronger now, sharp with panic. I took a step forward, my hand coming up. "Not that one. Kevin, stop him. That's not junk." Kevin glanced at the computer in Leo's arms and then back at me, his expression a mixture of pity and impatience. "Dad, come on. It's a box of wires. It's been sitting on that shelf since I was a kid. Nobody uses that stuff anymore. It's obsolete." He said the word obsolete with finality, as if he were pronouncing a sentence. Leo, sensing the tension, quickened his pace and slid the computer into the dark interior of the van. "It's not obsolete," I insisted, my heart hammering against my ribs. It's important. It's history. You don't understand what that is." "I understand it's old," Kevin said, his tone dropping into the condescending, measured one he used when he thought I was being irrational. He put a hand on my shoulder, a gesture meant to be calming that felt instead like being pinned in place. "Relax, Dad. It's just old trash. I got $100 for the lot. We're done here. I did you a favor." He gave my shoulder a pat, then turned and nodded to Leo, who slammed the van's rear doors shut. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet morning. Leo climbed into the driver's seat without a backward glance. Kevin walked around to the passenger side, still looking pleased with himself. "I'll call you later, Dad. We'll get that lunch." He got in. The van's engine grumbled, and then it began to back out of my driveway. I stood there, rooted to the spot, watching the taillights disappear down the street. The roar of the engine faded, replaced by the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. The disrespect was a cold, heavy stone in my gut, but the ignorance, that was worse. He hadn't just taken an object, he had erased a part of me, my past, my legacy, and he had done it with a smile, convinced he was the one being helpful. The sheer, staggering weight of his dismissal left me standing alone in the mouth of my emptied garage, feeling more invisible and unknown than I ever had in my entire life. The garage door closes with a soft final thud, sealing me inside my sanctuary. For a moment I just stand there, listening to the silence. It's a different silence now. The air, usually thick with a scent of solder and old paper, feels thinner, emptier. A specific patch of dust on the workbench is gone, a perfect rectangle marking where it used to be. Where it used to be. My name is Arthur. To my neighbors, I'm just the retired engineer down the street, the harmless old man who can fix a toaster that won't toast or a radio that's lost its voice. They bring me their broken things with a kind of fond pity, and I accept them with a quiet nod. It's a role I've settled into, like a well-worn pair of slippers, comfortable, unassuming. This garage is my world. It's more than a room, it's a timeline of my life, etched in silicon and steel. Shelves grown not with junk, but with artifacts. A box of vacuum tubes from the 50s, their glass cool and enigmatic. A stack of early circuit boards, the green fiberglass etched with copper pathways I designed myself. A disassembled oscilloscope I've been meaning to restore for a decade. To an outsider, it might look like chaos. To me, it's a library. Every component, every tool has a story. And now, one of the most important stories is missing. My eyes keep drifting back to that empty space. The Apple one. It wasn't much to look at, just a naked board with chips and wires, a testament to a time when computing was raw, visceral. You built the machine, and then you built the code for it, one painstaking line at a time. It wasn't a product, it was a promise. I built that one with my own hands in another garage, a world away in Silicon Valley, over 40 years ago. The smell of coffee and ambition was so thick you could taste it. We weren't just building computers, we were building the future, one clumsy, brilliant circuit at a time. I remember the feel of the soldering iron in my hand, the focus so absolute the rest of the world just fell away. I can still see Steve's intense gaze, Woss's quiet, genius tinkering. I was there. My fingerprints are on that revolution, baked into the very silicon of that board. It wasn't just a piece of history, it was a piece of me. A tangible proof that I, Arthur, had been part of something that changed everything. And Kevin, he called it a box of wires. A hot spike of anger tries to push its way up my throat, but I take a slow, deliberate breath. In, out. I've spent a lifetime learning to control the current, to regulate the voltage of my own emotions. I look around my sanctuary at the orderly chaos that is my mind made physical. This is who I am, not the placid old man my son sees, but an architect of systems. A man who understands that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, that every circuit must be grounded, that every signal must be processed. He thought he was helping. That's the thought I cling to, the insulator I wrap around the raw live wire of my hurt. He saw a dusty old board and a father he perceives as slipping into the clutter of old age. He saw a problem he could solve with a van and $100. He didn't see the legacy. He He didn't see the countless hours, the failed prototypes, the triumphant moment the screen finally flickered to life. He didn't see his father as a young man, full of fire and ideas, helping to midwife a new era into the world. How could he? I never told him. That past felt like another lifetime, a secret history belonging only to me and the few others who were there. I chose this quiet life, this anonymity. I wanted to leave the noise and the glory to others. I suppose, in a way, I built this persona, the harmless old man, just as carefully as I built that computer. And now, the character I created has been believed a little too well. So, I give him the benefit of the doubt. I swallow the bitterness. I tuck the sense of violation deep down inside, a closed circuit of private grief. I walk over to my bench, my hand instinctively reaching for a project. Mrs. Gable's antique clock from next door. The gears are frozen, the mainspring tired, a simple, tangible problem. I can fix this. I can understand its logic, trace its faults, and make it whole again. As I lay out my tools, the familiar weight of a screwdriver in my palm, I try to focus on the clock's delicate mechanics. But my mind is 1,000 miles and 40 years away, in a different garage, holding a soldering iron, building something the world had never seen before. The ghost of that machine is here with me, in this new, aching silence. And for the first time in a very long time, the quiet in my sanctuary feels less like peace and more like the calm before the storm. The next few days passed in a kind of low, humming fog. I went through the motions in my garage, my hands finding familiar work on a neighbor's malfunctioning radio, but my mind was back in that moment, watching the taillights of that van disappear with a piece of my soul in the back. I'd decided firmly to give Kevin the benefit of the doubt. He was my son. He saw a cluttered garage and an aging father. He thought he was helping. It was a generous fatherly lie I told myself, and I clung to it like a life raft. That raft shattered on the rocks of Sunday dinner. It's a tradition, one my late wife started decades ago. Kevin, his sister Sarah, and her family all cram into my modest dining room. The air is usually thick with the smell of roasted chicken and easy laughter. That Sunday, the smell was the same, but the atmosphere was different from the moment Kevin walked in. He had a swagger to him, a look of smug satisfaction plastered across his face. We were barely seated, passing around the mashed potatoes, when he launched his victory speech. "So you'll never guess what I did for the old man this week," he began, grinning around the table. Sarah smiled indulgently. Her husband, Mark, nodded along. I just kept my eyes on my plate, carefully cutting a piece of chicken. "His garage was a death trap," Kevin continued, his voice loud, performative. "Just piles and piles of junk. I'm talking real hoarder situation. So I took a day off work, hired a guy with a van, and we cleared it out. Did you a solid ride, Dad?" He looked at me, expecting gratitude. The table fell quiet for a moment. Sarah looked at me, a question in her eyes. I set my fork down. My voice was quiet, measured when I finally spoke. "You took my Apple computer, Kevin." He waved a hand, a dismissive, fluttering gesture that made my jaw tighten. "That old thing? Come on, Dad. It was covered in dust, sitting in a cardboard box. It was a fire hazard." He leaned forward as if sharing a secret with the whole table. "And get this, I actually got paid to take it away. $100 for the whole lot." He actually pulled his wallet out then, a thick leather thing, and extracted a crisp $100 bill. He slapped it down on the table next to my plate. The gesture was so profoundly condescending, so utterly devoid of any understanding, that for a second I couldn't even breathe. He was treating me like a child who'd done a good chore, paying me for my own dismembered history. "Kevin," I said, my voice low, straining against the tide of emotion I was fighting to hold back. "That wasn't junk. That was an Apple One. I built that. With my own hands. It's a piece of history." The laugh that burst from him was short, sharp, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the laugh you'd give a toddler who insisted his blanket was a magic cape. A piece of history. Dad, it was a box of wires and a wood panel. It looked like a high school science project that got a D-. Nobody uses that stuff anymore. It's obsolete. The word hung in the air. Obsolete, that he might as well have been describing me. That's what he saw when he looked at me and my garage. Not a sanctuary of creation and memory, but a museum of obsolescence. A life past its expiration date that needed to be cleared out for his convenience. The rest of the dinner was a quiet, painful affair for me. The conversation moved on, but I was stuck in that moment. The $100 bill sat by my plate like an accusation. I finally pushed it back toward him without a word. He just shrugged and pocketed it, utterly oblivious. The next morning, the fog of paternal forgiveness had completely burned away, replaced by a cold, clear resolve. I needed to know where it went. I called Kevin, my tone flat and businesslike. The man you sold my things to. I need his name. He sighed, the sound heavy with exasperation. Why, Dad? It's done. His name's Leo. Has a little place downtown called Retro Treasures or something. But it's a waste of time. I didn't reply. I just hung up and drove downtown. Retro Treasures was a cramped, dimly lit shop stuffed with lava lamps, beaded curtains, and racks of musty-smelling clothes. The man behind the counter matched his merchandise. Slick, trying too hard. He had too much gel in his hair and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This was Leo. I described the computer, the specific box. His eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. Oh, the old Apple kit. Yeah, your boy sold that to me. Got a sweet deal on it, let me tell you. I need it back, I said, my voice even. His smile tightened. I'm afraid that's not possible. All sales are final. Store policy. He gestured to a small, handwritten sign taped to the glass counter. You don't understand, I said, leaning forward slightly, my palms flat on the counter. That item was not my son's to sell. It belongs to me. I am here to buy it back from you. Name your price. Leo's smugness solidified into a wall. He crossed his arms, looking me up and down, seeing just another old man to be brushed aside. It's not for sale. I've already moved it along to a specialist, and like I said, policy is policy. The transaction is complete. Now, if you're not here to buy anything, I've got inventory to manage. He turned his back on me, a deliberate, final dismissal. I stood there for a long moment, watching him pretend to organize a stack of vinyl records. The initial sting of Kevin's disrespect had been bad. This was different. This was the cold, hard reality of avarice. My son's ignorance had handed my legacy to this opportunist, and he was hiding behind a flimsy sign to keep his ill-gotten prize. The $100 Kevin had been so proud of wasn't just an insult. It was the key that had unlocked my past and handed it to a stranger who saw nothing but a quick profit. The battle lines, I realized, were no longer just within my family. They were right here, in this dusty, dishonest little shop. The tablet buzzed on the workbench, a soft, insistent hum against the quiet of the garage. I'd been trying to lose myself in the simple, honest work of resoldering a connection on Mrs. Gable's ancient AM radio, a task that required just enough focus to keep the memory of my son's condescending smile at bay. My thumb, smudged with a bit of flux, swiped across the screen to dismiss the notification. It was a news alert from a tech antiquities feed I followed out of a sense of distant professional curiosity. Usually it was stories about vintage game cartridges or rare Soviet-era calculators. Harmless nostalgia. The headline didn't register at first. My eyes skimmed over it. Rare Apple I computer sells at auction for staggering sum. I almost scrolled past, then my brain, slower these days but still precise, caught up with my eyes. Staggering sum. The words had weight. I tapped the article, and there it was, the number. $500,000. A low whistle escaped my lips before I could stop it. An abstract sound of disbelief. But it was the photograph just below the headline that stole the air from my lungs. It was a professional shot taken on a brightly lit auction stage. And there, centered under the hot lights, was my board, my Apple I. I didn't need to see the serial number. I knew its topography better than the lines on my own palm. I knew the specific, slightly off-color shade of the green PCB, a batch anomaly from a supplier whose name I'd long forgotten. I knew the unique hand-filed notch near the edge connector where I'd slipped with a tool one late, caffeine-fueled night. I knew the faint, almost invisible ghost of a coffee ring I'd left on the corner of the wooden case, a testament to a 60-hour work week. My eyes, of their own volition, darted to the lower left corner of the image, and there it was, clear as day in the high-resolution photo, the serial number. It was a part of me, a string of digits I'd etched into existence. It was mine. Then I saw him. Standing just to the side of the new owner, a beaming man in a sharp suit holding a gavel, was Leo, the dealer, the slick opportunist who'd looked me in the eye and told me a deal was a deal, all sales final. He wasn't just in the photo, he was the center of it, his arm around the buyer, a grin splitting his face from ear to ear. It wasn't a smile of shared joy for a piece of history. It was the gloating, titillating, predatory grin of a man who had just pulled off a spectacular heist. He hadn't bought a piece of junk from a foolish old man. He'd recognized a lottery ticket, even if he hadn't known the exact winning numbers, and he'd cashed it in for $500,000. And that was the click. It was an almost audible sound in the silent garage, a deep tectonic shift inside me. It was the sound of the last vestige of paternal benefit, of the doubt shattering into a million irreparable pieces. It was the sound of a dormant engine, cold for decades, turning over once, roughly, and catching fire. It wasn't about the money. The number 500,000 was just a quantifier, a unit of measurement for the scale of the betrayal. The money was just the scorecard. This was about the principle. This was about my legacy, the very proof of my existence in a revolutionary time, being treated like a discarded piece of scrap. It had been hauled out of my sanctuary by my own son, who saw me as a hoarder to be managed, and sold for a pittance to a man who saw me as a mark to be scammed. Their combined arrogance and greed had conspired to erase me. Kevin, in his profound ignorance, had handed over a chapter of my life, a chapter of history, for $100. And Leo, in his venal opportunism, had flipped it for a fortune, treating my soul's work as a mere commodity. I looked down at my hands, resting on the workbench. They were old hands now, spotted and veined, but they had built that board. These fingers had carefully placed each resistor, each capacitor. This mind had designed the pathways that were now worth more than my house. I had been a ghost in my own life for so long, the harmless old man puttering in his garage. But in that moment, staring at Leo's grinning face and the glowing screen that held the image of my stolen past, the ghost solidified. The quiet, retired engineer named Arthur receded, and someone else, someone I hadn't been in a very, very long time, stepped forward. The fire I thought had banked to embers 40 years ago was now a roaring blaze. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. The tablet screen glowed in the dim light of the garage. The auction headline seared into my retinas. $500,000 for my computer, the one my own son had called trash, the one that dealer Leo had swindled away with a smug grin. For a long moment I just sat there on my old stool, the silence of the garage pressing in on me, and then I felt it, a slow, deep, familiar heat beginning to uncoil in my gut. I hadn't felt this particular fire in decades. I'd let it go, dormant, banked the embers under a lifetime of quiet retirement, of being Arthur the Fix-It Man. But it was there. It had always been there. My eyes drifted from the tablet, sweeping across the organized chaos of my sanctuary. The scent of solder and old wood filled my lungs, and for the first time in years, it didn't just smell like a hobby. It smelled like a time machine. It took me back. Not to the building of that specific Apple one, though I could still feel the weight of the board in my hands, the precise placement of each resistor. No, it took me back to the ecosystem it was born into. The dawn, the wild, chaotic, exhilarating dawn of the personal computing revolution. People have this romanticized idea of those days. They think of geniuses in garages, of eureka moments and pure innovation, and that was part of it, sure, but the bigger part, the part they don't put in the museums, was the jungle. It was a landscape of corporate sharks who saw our passion as a weakness to be exploited, of venture capitalists who thought a pocketful of cash bought them your soul, of rivals who would steal your schematics and patent your ideas before you'd even finished your coffee. I wasn't just an engineer back then. I was a survivor. My title might have said logic board architect, but my real job was strategist, a problem solver of the human variety. I remembered one particular suit from a big electronics firm, a man so polished he seemed to reflect the greed in his own eyes. He'd wanted a piece of a project I was consulting on, a new memory addressing technique. He came at me with contracts full of fine print designed to lock me out of my own work, with veiled threats about patent law I knew were bluffs, with a condescending smile that said I was just a tinkerer who didn't understand the real world. I'd sat there in a cheap diner, stirring my coffee while he talked. I didn't argue about the engineering. I didn't get angry. I listened. I learned his system. I identified his leverage points, a shaky relationship with his own board of directors, a looming product launch that needed our tech. And I pinpointed his weakness, his utter unshakable conviction that a technical mind couldn't possibly comprehend the nuances of business and pressure. So, I played his game. I used his own legal jargon to tie the project up in a way that would delay his launch by 6 months. I had a quiet, anonymous word with a journalist friend about the firm's questionable sourcing practices. I didn't make a single threat. I just laid out the new, uncomfortable reality of the chessboard. Within 48 hours, he was back at that diner, the condescension gone, replaced by a thin film of sweat on his brow. We signed a new contract, my terms, my name on the patents. That was my real skill. It was never just about the circuits. It was about understanding the larger system, the legal frameworks, the financial incentives, the unspoken rules of engagement. It was about finding the leverage. And most of all, it was about understanding human weakness, arrogance, greed, fear. They are more predictable than any silicon chip. You just have to know how to apply the right voltage. And now, sitting here, the ghost of that man stirring back to life, I looked at the problem before me. My son's disrespectful ignorance, Leo's opportunistic greed, my stolen legacy. This wasn't a situation for a shouting match. That's what Kevin would do. That's what a reactive, emotional person would do. This was a game of chess, a complex system that needed to be understood and then recalibrated. A plan began to form in my mind, not as a sudden burst of inspiration, but as a series of logical, interlocking steps, like the code I used to write. I would use the system. The law was my first tool, not as a blunt instrument, but as a precise one. I would prove ownership, establish provenance, and present the facts in such a way that the consequences for the other players would become terrifyingly clear. I would use psychological pressure. I wouldn't need to threaten Leo. I would just have to show him the cliff edge he was standing on and let his own fear do the rest. For Kevin, the pressure would be different. The weight of his mistake, the cold, hard evidence of his colossal misjudgment would be a far more effective teacher than any punishment I could devise. I would reclaim what was mine, not just the physical object, the box of wires and chips, but my history, my name, my respect. The fire was no longer just a warmth in my gut. It was a focused beam, a laser sight, finding its target. The quiet old man was stepping off the board. The player was taking his seat. The game was on. The fire was back. It was a cold, clean burn in my chest, a sensation I hadn't felt since the all-nighters in that other garage decades ago. This wasn't about rage. Rage was messy, inefficient. This was about precision. My son had handed my history to a fool, and that fool had sold it to the highest bidder. Now it was time to build a different kind of machine, one of leverage, pressure, and undeniable truth. The first component was legal foundation. I didn't go searching online for some ambulance chaser. I went deep into my own past, to a phone number I hadn't dialed in 20 years. Martin Croft answered on the second ring. He'd been the sharpest corporate counsel in the valley, the man we'd all turned to when the sharks started circling our startups. His voice was older, but the mind was just as quick. I laid it out for him, plain and simple. He didn't need the emotional context. He understood the violation of principle instantly. Within 48 hours, we had a dossier. It wasn't just a pile of papers. It was a narrative of ownership. My old engineering logs, photographs of me with the prototype, sworn affidavits from colleagues who are now grey-haired professors and retired CEOs. Martin had a forensic document expert verify the authenticity of my handwritten notes from 1976. We established a chain of custody so clear and so damning that it was irrefutable. The Apple one wasn't just mine, it was me. Its serial number was my fingerprint. With that foundation laid, I moved to the next piece of the mechanism, the auction house. I didn't send a threatening letter. I had Martin's firm send a polite, impeccably formatted package to their head of acquisitions and their general counsel. It contained a summary of our evidence and a simple, stark question. Were they aware they had facilitated the sale of stolen property with a value exceeding $500,000? We cited specific statutes, case law, and the potential for not just a civil suit, but criminal complaints for receiving stolen goods. We didn't make demands. We simply presented the facts and watched the gears of their own legal and public relations machinery begin to grind in panic. I knew their kind. Their entire business was built on reputation and perceived legitimacy. The shadow of a scandal like this, aiding and abetting the theft of a seminal piece of tech history, would be a poison pill. They would have to choose between protecting a single problematic sale and protecting their entire enterprise. Simultaneously, I set the final two pieces in motion. I arranged a meeting with Leo, the dealer, not in my garage and not in his cluttered shop. I chose a quiet, neutral cafe. I wanted him off his turf, in a place with no emotional anchors. I arrived early, sipping a black coffee. He swaggered in, still wearing that smug look, thinking he was meeting a confused old man he could brush off. I let him sit. I let him order his overpriced latte. And then I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It wasn't the full legal dossier. It was a summary, prepared by Martin, outlining the charges of felony theft by deception, fraud, and the projected financial damages from the impending lawsuit. I watched his face change. The smugness evaporated, replaced by a slow-dawning horror as he read the numbers, the legal codes, the reality of his situation. I didn't raise my voice. I was calm, almost conversational. "Leo," I said, "you bought stolen property from a naive young man and sold it for a life-changing amount of money. The problem is, you now possess the proceeds of a felony. The legal system tends to take a very dim view of that." I let the silence hang between us, letting him feel the walls closing in. While that pressure was building in the cafe, another kind of pressure was being applied across town. I had asked Kevin to come to the house. He arrived in it, still with that infuriating air of having done me a favor. I didn't offer him a drink. I simply handed him my tablet open to the news article about the $500,000 auction. I watched his face. The initial confusion, then the dawning comprehension, and finally the sickening gut-punch realization of what he had thrown away. Then I handed him the second document, a copy of the letter sent to the auction house. I didn't say a word, I just let him read. I watched the color drain from his face. I saw his hands begin to tremble. He tried to speak, to offer some weak justification, but I held up a single hand. The lesson wasn't in my words, it was in the cold, hard, legal type on the page in front of him. The weight of his arrogance, his condescension, his sheer ignorance was finally, truly crushing him. He left the house looking smaller than I had ever seen him. I returned my focus to Leo, who was now sweating in his chair. The final move was the offer, the choice. "You have a path out of this, Leo," I said, my voice still even. "You will contact the auction house immediately. You will explain that you sold them an item under a cloud of title, that the true owner has been located, and that the sale must be voided. You will facilitate the immediate and full return of the computer to me. You will bear any costs associated with this retrieval. You will do this politely and efficiently. If you do this, the legal actions against you will be paused. If you refuse, or if you delay, my lawyer will file the suit before the end of the business day, and I will personally ensure a press release detailing your actions finds its way to every tech, blog and news outlet in the country. Your business, your reputation, and your freedom are now on the clock. The choice is yours." I didn't wait for an answer. I stood up, left money on the table for the coffee, and walked out. I didn't need to see him fold. I could feel it. I had built my machine, piece by meticulous piece, and I had just switched it on. All that was left to do was wait for the result. Leo's office was exactly as I'd expected. Chrome and glass, a few cheaply framed posters of vintage ads, the air smelling of lemon-scented cleaner and ambition. He sat behind his desk, trying to maintain the smug posture of a man who just pulled off a major score, but the sheen of sweat on his forehead betrayed him. My lawyer, a silent, sharp-eyed woman named Miss Chen, had just finished laying out the legal landscape for him. It was a map leading directly to his ruin. He swallowed, a dry clicking sound in the quiet room. The documents were spread before him, the chain of title, the provenance I'd meticulously documented decades ago, the photographs of me with that very board in a Palo Alto garage. The law was a cold, hard system, and I had just input the correct code to make it work for me. "You can't. This is..." He stammered, his bravado cracking. "Who are you to do this?" I didn't answer immediately. I let the silence stretch, let him squirm in the space between his question and my response. I leaned forward, my elbows on my knees, my posture that of a weary professor, not a vengeful victim. "You made a fundamental error, Leo," I said, my voice even, almost gentle. "You assume that because a man is old and quiet and his hands are stained with solder, that he is insignificant. You confused a lack of noise for a lack of power." His eyes darted from me to Miss Chen and back. "Look, mister, I bought that board in good faith." "Your son said it was junk. My son was mistaken," I replied. "But you saw an opportunity. You saw a mark. You thought you were exploiting a weakness. But in any system, the greatest weakness is a failure to properly identify all the variables. You fail to identify me. Who are you? He asked again, his voice rising, tinged with a genuine, burgeoning fear that went beyond the lawsuit. I held his gaze. This was the moment. Not a moment of triumph, but of reclamation. My name is Arthur Walsh. I said it softly, but the name seemed to hang in the air, displacing the cheap lemon scent. For a moment nothing happened. Then I saw it, a flicker in his eyes, a frantic search through the mental filing cabinet of his niche knowledge. Walsh, Arthur Walsh. His face, which had been flushed with panic, began to drain of color. It was a slow, horrifying process to watch. The blood retreated, leaving a waxy, pale mask. His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He looked from my face to my hands. The same hands he'd probably dismissed as the gnarled, useless tools of an old tinkerer. No, he whispered. It wasn't a denial, it was a realization. The Walsh? The logic board? The Apple one? I gave a single slow nod. The full weight of his catastrophic miscalculation landed on him all at once. He hadn't just scammed a senile old man. He had tried to steal, to profit from, the life's work of a ghost. A name whispered in collector forums, a footnote in the biographies of more famous men, but a name that carried immense, quiet weight in the very specific world he pretended to be an expert in. He had tried to fence a piece of the true cross, and he had just discovered he'd been bargaining with the carpenter who shaped the wood. "Oh God," he breathed, his body slumping in the chair as if all the bones had been removed. He was looking at a legend, and the legend was looking back, disappointed and utterly in control. It was then that I sensed a shift in the doorway. I didn't need to turn. I knew Kevin was there. He'd been hovering outside, summoned by a terse text from me that simply read, "My garage." Now he had heard everything. He had heard the name. He had seen Leo's collapse. I risked a glance. My son was standing frozen, one hand braced against the doorframe. His face was a battlefield of emotions, confusion, disbelief, and a dawning, gut-wrenching horror that was far more profound than Leo's fear. Leo was afraid of financial and legal ruin. Kevin was watching the complete and total demolition of his entire worldview. The harmless old man he had patronized, the hoarder he had tried to help, the father he had been so condescendingly sure was slipping into irrelevance, was Arthur Walsh, a pioneer, an architect, a giant whose shadow he had been living in his entire life without ever knowing it. The $100 he'd bragged about was a monument to his own staggering ignorance. I saw the shame hit him, a physical blow that made him sway on his feet. The trust between us didn't just break in that moment, it vaporized. Leo was now scrambling, a man desperate to find a lifeboat on a ship he'd just set on fire. "Mr. Walsh, Arthur, I had no idea. I am so sorry. This is a terrible misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding, Leo," I said, my voice still calm. "It is a situation, and you will now rectify it." He didn't hesitate. He snatched his phone from the desk, his hands trembling so violently he nearly dropped it. He pulled up a number, put it on the speaker, and the room listened as he called the auction house. "Yes, this is Leo Gable," he said, his voice strained and obsequious. "Regarding the Apple One, lot number 417, yes. There's been a catastrophic error in provenance. The sale is void. I repeat, the sale is void. The item was not mine to sell. It is the stolen property of Mr. Arthur Walsh." He said my name with a reverence that was both sickening and satisfying. "You need to contact the winning bidder immediately and inform them. The computer is to be returned to Mr. Walsh. I will personally cover any and all costs, any fees. Just make it right." He hung up, looking at me like a dog waiting for a command. The collapse was complete. The slick opportunist was gone, replaced by a terrified man who now understood exactly who he was dealing with. The computer was coming home, but the silence in that room, thick with Kevin's shattered respect and Leo's abject terror, was the real price. And the cost. The Apple One was returned to my garage on a Tuesday morning. 2 men in dark suits brought it, some handling the wooden crate with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious artifacts. They didn't say much, just asked me to sign a digital pad, their eyes occasionally darting around my workspace with undisguised curiosity. When they left, I was alone with it again. The cardboard box was gone, replaced by this custom foam-lined case. It felt foreign, like a soldier returning from a war he never wanted to fight, dressed in a uniform that wasn't his. I didn't open the case right away. I just pulled up my old stool and looked at it. For 48 hours, this piece of my soul had been a commodity, a prize for a collector. Now it was just a box in a box, sitting on the same workbench where it was born. The garage was silent, the way it always is, but the silence felt different now. It wasn't peaceful, it was the silence after a storm has passed, when the damage is all that's left to survey. The object was back, but nothing else was. The space it occupied in my life had been violently reshaped. I thought getting it back would feel like a victory. It didn't. It felt like a salvage operation. I had won the battle, reclaimed the territory, but the landscape was forever scarred. Leo's downfall was swift, and in its own way, elegant. I didn't have to lift a finger. The tech world is a small, vicious town, and word travels fast. The story of how he'd tried to swindle Arthur Walsh, one of the original ghostly names from the Homebrew Computer Club, spread through online forums and industry newsletters like a virus. His vintage shop, which was really just a front for flipping uninformed people's treasures, was review-bombed into oblivion. Former customers came out of the woodwork with their own tales of being lowballed. His social media was a graveyard of angry comments and mocking memes. His business partner left him. The lease on his storefront wasn't renewed. Within weeks, Leo's vintage tech was a boarded-up storefront with a "for lease" sign in the window. He wasn't charged with a crime, but the court of public opinion had handed down a life sentence. I felt no satisfaction in it, only a cold acknowledgement of cause and effect. He made his bed in a den of lions, and he was surprised when they bit. But that was just noise. The real aftermath was living in my house. Kevin came to see me the day after the computer returned. He didn't call first. He just appeared at the garage door, looking like a man who hadn't slept in a week. His shoulders were slumped, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. The arrogant, condescending posture he'd carried for years was gone, replaced by a palpable weight of shame. "Dad," he started, his voice cracking on the single syllable. He stood there just inside the doorway and delivered an apology. It was a good one too, well-rehearsed, thorough. He talked about his ignorance, his arrogance, his failure to see me as anything other than an old man clinging to junk. He said he was shattered. He used that word, shattered. He said the guilt was eating him alive, that he couldn't believe what he'd done. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I let him say every word he had prepared, and when he was done, the garage was quiet again, save for the hum of the fluorescent light overhead. "I accept your apology, Kevin," I said. My voice was even, calm. He looked at me, waiting for more, for absolution, for the fatherly warmth that would tell him everything was going to be okay, that we could sweep this under the rug and go back to the way things were. It never came. The trust between us wasn't just bent, it was broken. A fundamental pillar of our relationship, the unspoken understanding that a son should have a baseline respect for his father, had been dynamited. He hadn't just sold a computer. He had dismissed my life's work, my history, my very identity. He had looked at the core of who I was and called it trash. You can forgive an action, but how do you rebuild the foundation after it's been proven so fragile? He finally mumbled something about giving me space and left. The distance between us as he walked away felt vast and permanent. It was the distance between who he thought I was and who I am. The harmless old man was a fiction he'd created for his own comfort, and now that fiction was dead. What was left in its place was a stranger he had profoundly wronged. So I sit here now, in the aftermath. The Apple One is back on its shelf. The legal documents are filed away. The villain of the piece has been vanquished. By all accounts, it's a happy ending. But the object is just an object. It's a piece of molded plastic and carefully soldered wires. The real loss, the one that can't be created and returned by men in dark suits, is the easy, unthinking trust I once had in my own son. That is gone, and its return is not guaranteed in 48 hours, or 48 weeks, or perhaps ever. The garage is quiet again, but the silence now is the sound of something broken, and I am left to decide if or how it can ever be fixed. The Apple One sits behind a thick pane of glass now, in a climate-controlled room at the Computer History Museum. It's not in my garage anymore. I go to see it sometimes. There's a small, elegant plaque next to it. It doesn't just list the serial number and the specs. It tells a story. It has my name on it. Arthur Walsh, co-creator. It's strange seeing your life summed up in a few lines of engraved brass. For decades that machine was just a part of me, a memory box filled with solder fumes and the electric thrill of a new dawn. Now it belongs to everyone, and honestly, that feels right. Letting it go was the final piece of the puzzle. It was never really about owning the physical object. It was about owning the story. And now that story is told. My relationship with Kevin is functional. We talk on the phone every other Sunday. He asks about my health. I ask about his work. The conversations are polite, careful, like we're both walking across a floor made of very thin ice. The trust isn't broken. It's been fundamentally rearranged. He saw a side of me he never knew existed, and I saw a carelessness in him I never wanted to see. He learned his lesson, a brutal one, about respect and about the danger of assumptions. He thought he was dealing with a harmless old man who collected junk. He found out he was dealing with a force of nature he had helped create. There's a distance between us now that I don't think will ever fully close. It's the distance between who he thought I was and who I actually am. It's a chasm carved by his own condescension. We're civil, but the easy father-son camaraderie is a ghost. It's a loss, a quiet, persistent ache, but it's a truth I can live with. Some bridges, once burned, can only be rebuilt as narrower, more cautious structures. So, I've poured that energy elsewhere. My garage is still my sanctuary, but now its doors are open to a different kind of future. I started a small, completely informal mentorship program. No flyers, no sign-up sheets. Word just got around. A few kids from the local high school, the ones with that familiar, hungry look in their eyes, the ones who aren't satisfied with just playing on a computer but want to know how it thinks, they show up on my doorstep. We don't use fancy kits or pre-packaged lessons. We use salvaged parts, broken radios, and my old stories. I teach them how to read a schematic, how to flow solder like it's a second language, how to listen to the hum of a circuit and diagnose its ailment. But more importantly, I teach them the real, unvarnished history of Silicon Valley. Not the sanitized version of geniuses in turtlenecks, but the truth, the chaos, the all-nighters in garages that smelled of pizza and desperation, the fierce arguments over a few lines of code, the sheer dumb luck and the bitter betrayals. I tell them about the giants whose names are never in the history books, the people who built the foundations that the famous ones stood upon. I see their eyes light up. They're not just learning about electronics, they're learning about legacy. My life has settled back into a kind of quiet rhythm. The frantic energy of the confrontation is gone. The lawyers are gone. The phone calls from reporters have long since stopped. But I am not the man I was before. That man was a sleeping lion, comfortable in his den, content to let the world forget his roar. That man is gone. The community looks at me differently now. It's not pity or the polite dismissal they once reserved for the nice old man who fixes toasters. It's a profound, deep-seated respect. They see me on my porch, and they don't just see Arthur the retiree. They see a piece of living history. They see the quiet strength it took to build an industry and the fiercer strength it took to reclaim my dignity from my own son. The parents of the kids I mentor thank me with a reverence that is almost awkward. The local hardware store owner now asks for my opinion on new inventory with genuine interest. I am no longer invisible. I am known, and in that knowing, there is a peace that is far more satisfying than the silence that came before. The lion is awake, but he no longer needs to roar. His presence is enough. The garage is quiet now. The Apple I is gone, safely housed behind glass in a museum where it belongs. My workbench is tidy. Just a simple radio I'm fixing for a neighbor sitting on it. The dust has settled in more ways than one. And I find myself here, thinking about it all, about what it meant. People see an old man puttering in his garage, and they make an assumption. It's a natural one, I suppose. They see the grey hair, the slow walk, the comfortable silence, and they think the story is over. They see the past as something to be cleared out, like junk. They don't understand that the past isn't just a collection of old things. It's the foundation of everything we have today. That box of wires my son so casually dismissed. It wasn't junk. It was a birth certificate. It was the tangible proof of a revolution that started in a garage, not unlike this one, built by hands not so different from these, hands that are a little more gnarled now, a little more worn, but hands that remember. You never know what giants walk among you, disguised as ordinary men. We don't wear our resumes on our sleeves. Our greatest triumphs are often quiet, personal things. The young see the world as something they are building, and they are, but they forget they are building it on a foundation laid by others. They see a quiet man and assume there is nothing but quiet inside. They don't see the fires that once raged, the battles fought, the mountains moved. They don't see the ghost of the young visionary still living behind these old eyes. That's the real lesson here, I think. It's not about the money, though $500,000 is a powerful teacher. It's not even about the object itself, as much as I loved it. It's about respect. Respect for the journey. Respect for the knowledge that comes not from a textbook, but from having been there, from having done it, from having failed and gotten back up again. My son saw an old computer. I saw a piece of my soul, a chapter of history I helped write. He saw a problem to be solved. I saw a legacy to be honored. Never ever underestimate the quiet man in the workshop. The man who speaks softly is often the one who has learned that volume is not the same as power. The man who moves slowly may be conserving energy for a fight you can't even conceive of. My fight wasn't with my fists, it was with the system. It was a chess game played with legal documents, with cold, hard facts, and with the unshakable truth of who I was and what I had built. The lion didn't need to roar to reclaim his territory, he just needed to stand up. My relationship with my son is different now. There's a distance that wasn't there before, a crack that may never fully heal. He looks at me now and doesn't just see his father, he sees Arthur Walsh, the architect. There's guilt in his eyes and shame, but there's also a new, wary form of respect. It's a painful way for a son to learn to respect his father, but sometimes the most important lessons are the most painful ones. So now I teach in a different way. I have a few kids from the neighborhood who come by, their eyes wide with curiosity. I show them how to solder, how a transistor works, how to make an idea into something real. I tell them stories of Silicon Valley when it was just orchards and big dreams. I'm passing on the legacy, not as a dusty relic in a box, but as a living, breathing thing. The fire isn't gone. It's just been banked, waiting to spark in the next generation. So look around you. Look at the quiet people in your life. The old man who fixes your toaster, the retired teacher down the street, the unassuming woman who tends her garden. You have no idea the battles they've fought, the worlds they've built, the strength that lies dormant within them. Their garages and their attics aren't filled with junk. They're filled with libraries of lived experience, with monuments to forgotten triumphs. Treat them with respect, listen to their stories, because that junk might just be a piece of history, and that quiet man might just be a giant. If this story of a reclaimed legacy and a hard-learned lesson in respect meant something to you, I'd be honored if you'd like the video and subscribe to the channel. More importantly, I want to hear from you. Share your own stories in the comments below. Tell me about the quiet giants in your life, the hidden strength you've discovered, or a time you learned to look beyond the surface. Your story is a part of this legacy, too.